When my son-in-law seized the microphone at my daughter's wedding and called me a lonely relic throwing money around to feel important, the room did not fall silent. It roared with laughter. 300 guests. My daughter is among them, all laughing at a man who had given them everything he could. The very next morning, I canceled the waterfront condominium that was meant to be their wedding gift, a place valued at nearly $500,000. And that decision was only the beginning of what would unfold in the months that followed. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, before I tell you how a single moment shattered decades of sacrifice, and how that humiliation became the turning point that rebuilt my entire life. Let me take you to the night everything began to unravel. My name is Jonathan Hale, and I am 67 years old. For more than 4 decades, I built a steady life in Charleston, running a modest chain of boutique inns along the coast. My work brought me stability, financial comfort, and a reputation I never sought but somehow earned. What did not bring, at least not fully, was the sense of meaning my late wife, Margaret, always wished for me. She left this world in the spring of 2016 after a year-long battle with a cruel and fast-moving cancer. I remember the exact time she took her final breath, not because I'm trying to hold on to tragedy, but because the moment before it is carved into me like a final instruction. "John," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady, "when our daughter marries, give her the celebration she dreams of. Promise me you will give her what I won't be here to see." I promised her with every ounce of strength I had left. And when Lily, our daughter, announced her engagement to Adrian Pierce nearly 8 years later, I knew what I had to do. Without hesitation, I told her, "Your wedding will be perfect. You won't have to worry about a thing." Her eyes glowed the same way Margaret's did when she was young, bright, hopeful, untouched by hardship. That look alone made every dollar, every ounce of effort worth it. I poured over $225,000 into that celebration. The grandest ballroom in Charleston, imported florals from overseas, a world-class quartet, and a dress custom designed by a European artist who still refuses commissions from almost everyone. It was extravagant, it was breathtaking, and it was exactly what Margaret would have wanted. But while I orchestrated every detail, something inside me stirred, not doubt, but memory. Memories I had buried under responsibility. Memories of a life I might have lived had I dared to follow the dreams I once held in my hands like unfinished blueprints. One night, while sorting invoices, I stumbled upon a box I had not opened since my 20s, sketches of handcrafted furniture, tools I once saved money for, a photograph of myself, and a woman named Elena, taken in Boulder in 1987, when I still believed creativity was more important than stability. I closed the box then, not knowing it would reopen more than my past later. But before any of that mattered, before the secrets, the recordings, the betrayals, the legal unravelings, the shocking truths about my daughter and her husband, there was the moment that shattered everything. Adrian's wedding night speech. A speech that transformed me instantly from the man who had given him everything to the man he believed was safe enough to mock publicly. And what neither he nor Lily, nor any of those 300 laughing people knew, was that I had taken precautions years earlier, safeguards that would eventually expose every lie, every manipulation, every whispered plan spoken under my roof. And those precautions would become the catalyst for a transformation none of them ever saw coming. 8 years had passed since Margaret's death, yet her final request lived inside me like a compass needle refusing to waver. There were mornings when I would wake believing I heard her footsteps in the hallway, soft, patient, familiar, only to remember she was no longer on this earth. And in those moments, the promise I made to her felt like the last tether connecting us across the divide. Lily had been 25 when she lost her mother. My son, Eric, only 22. I remember the 3 of us in that hospital room, Margaret's hand cooling in mine, Lily gripping the blanket as if she could anchor time, Eric looking at the heart monitor as though he could will its numbers upward through sheer will. I had never felt so responsible for preserving the world someone else built. Margaret was the heart of our home, I merely kept the roof standing. After she passed, I threw everything into my ends, not because I loved the business, but because the noise of work was the only thing louder than grief. Some people heal by talking. I heal by doing. Nearly 8 years later, in early January of last year, Lily came to my home with eyes shining like a child who had discovered her birthday surprise early. She held out her hand, displaying a slender platinum ring. "Dad," Adrian proposed. "We're getting married this summer." I hugged her, feeling something warm and bittersweet stir beneath my ribs. I congratulated Adrian, too, a well-groomed man in his mid-30s, always impeccably dressed, polite in a distant kind of way, the sort of person who stood straight but never fully relaxed his shoulders. I had never felt close to him, but I dismissed it as generational difference. Not everyone reveals themselves quickly. True to my promise, I told Lily the wedding would be exactly what she imagined. "Spare no expense," I said. "Your mother would want it that way." She nearly cried. And for that moment alone, every plan, every check I would write, felt justified. Those next months became a blur of arrangements. I booked the ballroom overlooking the harbor, the one with the gleaming chandeliers and arched windows. I secured the florists who worked with imported blooms from South America and Italy. I ordered hand-painted menus, artisanal desserts, vintage porcelain place settings. By late spring, I had poured nearly $250,000 into making the celebration flawless. And yet, despite the beauty unfolding on paper, something inside me remained unsettled. Maybe it began with the night I opened that old wooden box, the one tucked deep in my office closet, untouched since the late 1990s. It still smelled faintly of cedar. Inside were the remnants of the life I abandoned in my 20s. Sketches of furniture, notes about technique, lists of tools, designs full of hope and youthful certainty. There were photographs, too, including that picture of me beside Elena, taken during an art exhibition in Boulder. Her encouragement echoed through memory. "John, don't spend your life building what others expect. Build what makes you alive." I had not thought of her in decades, but looking at that photograph made something ache in me, a quiet yearning for a life I had set aside to become the responsible one. Still, I closed the box. Too much was happening to indulge nostalgia. The first real sign that something was wrong with Adrian came in March, subtle, almost ignorable. His visits became less frequent, his tone shorter. When he did stop by, he looked around my home with a strange mix of appraisal and impatience, as if calculating something I could not see. "Pre-wedding nerves?" Lily insisted. "You know how stressed he gets with work. He's juggling big architectural projects right now." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But my son, Eric, saw through things more quickly than I did. One evening, while helping me sort receipts for the caterer, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Dad, I just don't trust Adrian. There's something off about him." I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "You're protective of your sister. That's all." Eric didn't laugh. "No, it's more than that. He studies you. He listens, but only enough to respond politely. Not because he cares." He paused, then added more quietly, "I think he wants something from you." I waved the comment away at the time, refusing to let suspicion grow roots. I had a promise to fulfill. Lily's happiness came first. Whatever lingering sense of unease whispered in the back of my mind, I buried it beneath checklists and deadlines. But the truth is, by the time June approached, I felt something shifting around me, an invisible tension, like a storm gathering far out at sea long before the first clouds appear. I didn't know then that every quiet instinct, every subtle warning, every moment of discomfort was leading toward a single night. A single speech, a single sentence spoken into a microphone that would break open the truth I had tried so hard not to see. And once that truth emerged, nothing in my life would ever resemble the life I thought I had built. The morning of Lily's wedding arrived with a sky so clear it felt staged. Charleston has a habit of showing off in summer. Light reflecting off the water, gulls gliding over the harbor, the kind of breeze that pretends it will stay cool all day but never does. I woke just before 6, having slept only a few hours. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was something harder to name, a tightness in the chest that made breathing feel like lifting weight. I showered, shaved more carefully than I had in years, and put on the charcoal suit I had tailored months earlier specifically for this day. As I adjusted my deep blue tie, I whispered to the reflection, "Margaret, I'm keeping my promise." The words trembled on my tongue, but speaking them gave me strength. The civil ceremony took place late that morning in a restored courthouse overlooking the water. Lily looked radiant, truly radiant, in her gown of soft ivory silk, a gown that cost more than my first car, yet felt entirely worth it when I saw her step into the sun-dappled atrium. Her hair was pinned with tiny freshwater pearls from a set that belonged to Margaret. The moment I saw those pearls, something inside me warmed and broke at the same time. Lily squeezed my arm as I walked her down the aisle. "Dad," she murmured, voice trembling with joy. "Mom would have loved this." She was right, and that knowledge was both gift and wound. Adrian stood near the officiant wearing a tailored black suit, posture perfect, as always. When his eyes met mine, he smiled, a flawless, measured smile, the kind you practice in front of a mirror. The ceremony itself was simple and elegant. They exchanged vows, signed their marriage papers, and kissed under the applause of around 60 close relatives and friends. Eric stood beside me, his jaw tight, shoulders tense. I nudged him gently. "You all right, son?" He nodded without confidence. "I'll be better when this is over." I dismissed the comment with a pat on his arm, but a flicker of unease stirred in me again. Faint but persistent. By evening, the real celebration began. The reception hall was something out of a dream. High ceilings with sweeping drapery, chandeliers sparkling like suspended constellations, floral arrangements filling the air with a sweet citrusy scent. I spared no expense. Imported roses, handcrafted centerpieces, porcelain plateware, a 4-tier cake adorned with edible blossoms. The guest list numbered exactly 300, a combination of Lily's friends, Adrian's colleagues, extended family, and acquaintances from Charleston's business circles. I watched guests enter, admire the decor, take photos of the details I had poured months into perfecting. For a moment, pride swelled in my chest. Not pride in luxury, but pride in knowing I had fulfilled Margaret's final wish. My dear friend Charles Bennett, a retired attorney who had advised me for years, caught my eye from across the room and offered a small nod. He knew what this day meant to me. He understood better than anyone. Dinner went flawlessly. Smoked trout with citrus glaze. Fillets seared to perfection. Handmade truffles for dessert. The quartet played softly in the background while guests murmured their admiration. If the story ended there, I would have considered it one of the proudest days of my life. But even amid the beauty of those moments, subtle fractures began to show. Adrian's parents, impeccably dressed, impeccably stiff, barely acknowledged me. They offered polite smiles that felt more like thinly veiled condescension. Throughout dinner, Adrian kept glancing at them with an expression I had never seen before. Something between anticipation and calculation. When dessert plates were cleared, the master of ceremonies, a charismatic entertainer I had hired for a fee I now regret, stepped forward with a bright smile and announced that it was time for the toasts. Traditionally, I might have spoken first, but Lily had asked me earlier not to. "Dad," she said apologetically, "I'd rather keep the speeches short. You don't need to say anything. Just being here is enough." I accepted that without protest. I didn't need attention. My gift was the day itself. The best man spoke first, a colleague of Adrian's from his architecture firm. His speech was predictable but pleasant. Light jokes, fond memories, well wishes. Applause. Next came Lily's maid of honor, her cousin. She shared sweet stories from their childhood, a few inside jokes that made Lily laugh. More applause. Everything unfolding as expected. Then, without warning, Adrian rose from his chair. He didn't wait for the MC to invite him. He simply walked to the center of the room, took the microphone confidently, and tapped it twice. The speakers hummed. "I want to say a few words," he announced. A murmur rippled across the hall. Lily smiled at him, puzzled but delighted. I felt a faint pressure in my chest, the kind that announces a storm before anyone sees clouds. Adrian began with a warm tone, thanking the guests, praising the vendors, complimenting the decor. Then he lifted his glass and turned toward me. "And of course," he said loudly, "we owe tonight to someone very special, someone who paid for absolutely everything." 300 heads turned toward me. I smiled politely, nodding. But the look in Adrian's eyes shifted. A subtle sharpening. A cruel glint, almost playful. At that moment, though I didn't yet understand why, I knew something was about to break. Adrian lifted his glass higher, his grin widening as if he were preparing for a finale no one had asked for. "Let's give a huge round of applause," he announced, "to the man who funded every inch of this event. This magnificent hall, the feast, the orchestra, even the embroidered linen on the tables." Light laughter scattered across the room. I shifted in my chair, offering a modest nod. This was awkward, yes, but harmless enough. People thanked benefactors at weddings all the time. I assumed this was simply another uncomfortable but manageable moment. But then Adrian changed his tone. His voice sharpened, almost imperceptibly, but enough to prick the air. "And do you all know why he did it?" He continued, dragging out each word as though savoring them. "Because this old man is desperate for attention and thinks buying affection will make him feel less alone." The room froze. For 2 full seconds, there was nothing. Not breath, not movement, not sound. Then laughter. Laughter that began as a few nervous chuckles, then quickened, then expanded into a rolling wave that filled the hall like thunder breaking open the sky. 300 guests roaring as if Adrian had delivered a masterful punchline. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked instinctively toward Lily, expecting horror, or at least discomfort, a sign that she understood the cruelty in her husband's words. Instead, she was laughing, not a timid or apologetic laugh, but a genuine one, the kind that crinkles the eyes. She even leaned into Adrian's side, sharing in the moment. My heart sank with a weight I had never felt, not even on the day Margaret died, because grief, at least, is a clean wound. This was wrought, slow, and deliberate. Adrian continued, encouraged by the response. "He probably thinks being everyone's benefactor makes him noble," he went on, shrugging theatrically. "But really, he's just a lonely man with more money than relationships." More laughter. 300 strangers laughing at me, at the man who had given his daughter everything he had been asked to give. I did not cry. I did not shout. Instead, something inside me grew incredibly still, as though the world had begun to crystallize around me. For the first time that night, everything was clear, absolutely, painfully clear. They were using me. Lily, whether consciously or not, had allowed this man to turn me into a stage prop for their entertainment. Adrian had not slipped. This was rehearsed, planned, built on months, maybe years of quiet mockery beneath my roof. I rose slowly from my chair. Eric's hand brushed my arm. "Dad, I need some air," I murmured, keeping my voice level. "Let me come with you." "No, stay. I wanted no witnesses, no support, no rescue. I wanted distance, immediate distance from the echo of their laughter." As I walked toward the exit, the sound behind me gradually softened. A few people noticed me leaving, but made no move to stop me. Why would they? I was the joke of the evening, the benefactor whose humiliation came at a discount. Free, easy, permissible. The night air outside the hall was heavy with summer humidity. I inhaled deeply, but even the fresh air felt thick. My car sat beneath a dim streetlight, polished and quiet, a useless symbol of a life I had built, a life suddenly revealed as fragile as wet paper. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. Absolute numbness. A kind of emotional frost that coated every corner of my mind. I stared through the windshield at nothing at all until my phone buzzed. Lily's name blinked across the screen. I declined the call. It rang again, this time Adrian. I silenced it. A few minutes later, it buzzed once more. Decline. Silence. Off. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat, as if burying it would bury the night itself. When I finally drove home, it was past midnight. The house, once the center of my life, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cavernous. Like a museum of memories I could no longer touch without pain. I turned on only the small lamp in my study, letting the room glow dimly. I poured a glass of aged whiskey I rarely opened, not to celebrate, not even to soothe, but simply to remind myself I was still capable of choosing something for me. 2 long sips burned their way down. Then I pulled up the folder on my computer labeled Pierce Residence Gift. Inside were the documents for the waterfront condominium I planned to transfer to Lily and Adrian as a wedding gift, a place valued at nearly $500,000, purchased as a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Looking at the contract now, I felt no hesitation, only clarity. Every moment of the evening replayed in my mind, sharper now in the quiet. Adrian's smirk, Lily's laughter, the roar of the crowd. My humiliation had been entertainment. I reached for my phone and powered it back on. Dozens of missed calls and messages appeared instantly. Desperation disguised as concern. I ignored all of them and opened a new text message. To Charles Bennett message. I need to see you first thing in the morning. Bring the condo documents. No anger, no embellishment, just the necessary truth. I set the phone aside and stared once more at the contract, the gift meant to honor my late wife's final wish. Now, it marked the beginning of my transformation. Charles arrived at my home just after sunrise, carrying a thermos of strong coffee and his leather briefcase that had aged nearly as much as the both of us. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, the kind of friend who knows when formality becomes unnecessary. You look like you slept less than I did, he said quietly. I doubt either of us slept, I replied. He set the thermos on the table and studied me for a moment. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the speech, the laughter, Lily's reaction, and the numbing calm that had followed. Charles didn't interrupt once, not even to curse, which for him showed remarkable restraint. When I finished, he nodded slowly, as though confirming something he had suspected for years. I brought the condo documents, he said, but before we handle any paperwork, there's something else we need to review. He gestured toward the discreet security console mounted beside a bookshelf, the system he had convinced me to install years earlier, shortly after a colleague of his had been defrauded by a family member. Back then, I thought Charles was being overly cautious. Now, caution felt prophetic. You told me, he reminded gently, that the system stores audio and video from the common areas of your home for up to 6 months. Let's take a look at every visit they made recently. A cold shiver passed through me. I hadn't thought about the recordings last night, not in the haze of humiliation, but the moment he said it, something in me clicked into place. I walked to the console, keyed in the passcode, and opened the archive. The earliest relevant file was from late May, just a few weeks before the wedding. The footage showed Lily and Adrian entering my kitchen while I worked outside in the garden. Adrian opened the refrigerator and poured 2 glasses of water. Lily leaned against the counter, arms folded. Then Lily's voice, soft but clear. Do you think he suspects anything? And Adrian's reply, almost amused. Your father? Not a chance. He's so focused on fulfilling that dramatic promise he made to your mother that he doesn't see anything else. My pulse quickened. He continued, lifting his glass in mock salute. It's almost too easy. The man leads with sentiment instead of sense, and we benefit. I paused the playback. My hand trembled, not with rage, but recognition. The laughter at the wedding had not been a moment of intoxicated thoughtlessness. It was the culmination of something deeply rooted. Play the rest, Charles murmured. So I did. More recordings appeared, moments I had forgotten, or brushed off, or been too trusting to question. A dinner 3 weeks before the ceremony. An afternoon in early June. Quiet conversations they thought were private. One recording struck particularly deep. In it, Adrian paced my living room while Lily sat tense on the sofa. Adrian spoke into his phone, voice sharp. I've been pretending to care about his endless stories for nearly 3 years. 3 years, Richard. Do you know how exhausting it is? But once the condo is signed over, we can finally move on with our lives. He laughed, the same laugh I'd heard echo over a microphone the night before. Lily didn't laugh, but she didn't stop him either. She only looked down, twisting her fingers. I paused the video again. And you never noticed anything? Charles asked, not accusing, but urging me to see the full picture. I noticed feelings I admitted, small things, fleeting doubts. But I told myself Lily loved him. And Margaret's promise dash. Margaret asked you to give her daughter love, Charles interrupted softly. Not to offer yourself up to be ridiculed and exploited. I swallowed hard. We continued reviewing clips until my office felt colder than the morning air outside. 20-something recordings, conversations filled with disdain, entitlement, strategy. All under my roof. All spoken with the confidence of people who saw me as a harmless resource rather than a human being. At one point, Lily's voice broke through the speakers again. He's my father, Adrian. Yes, he talks too much about the past, but he means well. To which Adrian replied, meaning well is irrelevant. What matters is what he can give. Then Lily's sigh. He won't say no to anything. He never has. Those words cut the deepest, not because they were untrue, but because they revealed precisely how she had come to rely on my unconditional love, not with gratitude, but expectation, a flaw I had unknowingly nurtured. By the time we reached the final recording, the sun had risen fully, casting warm light across the room that contrasted painfully with what we were hearing. Charles closed his notebook. This is systematic manipulation, he said. Repeated. Intentional. Documented. I nodded. The numbness from the night before had dissolved, replaced with something steadier. Not anger. Not sorrow. Resolution. What do you want to do, John? He asked. Truly, I want to reclaim my dignity, I replied. And I want them, both of them, to understand that choices carry consequences. Real ones. A small, approving smile tugged at the corner of Charles's mouth. Then let's begin. He opened his briefcase and arranged 3 folders neatly on my desk. One, he said, tapping the first folder, is the contract for the waterfront condo. You can cancel the transfer within 24 hours without significant penalty. He then tapped the second. 2. The asset protection structure we built after Margaret passed. It includes conditional clauses regarding inheritance and financial gifts. Finally, he tapped the third. And 3. Legal pathways, both civil and protective, should this escalate. I looked at the folders, tangible representations of the past, the present, and the possible future. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt something close to control returning. Start with canceling the condo, I said. Then we'll move on to the rest. Charles nodded. I'll draft the notices immediately. As he began typing, a quiet truth settled inside me. The man they mocked last night died in that hall. The man sitting here now, calm, awake, resolute, was someone they never expected to meet. By mid-morning, Charles had prepared the formal notice to cancel the transfer of the waterfront condominium. He drafted the letter with careful precision, invoking the bad faith clause that allowed me not only to withdraw from the contract, but to reclaim the entire amount, including the substantial deposit I had already paid. Once I send this, he warned gently, the bank will open an internal investigation. It will take a few days, but the evidence you have will more than justify the cancellation. Send it, I said without hesitation. Charles clicked a button. Done. They will receive it within 15 minutes. It was astonishing how the push of a single key could reorient the trajectory of an entire family. Astonishing, too, how calm I felt. The emotional turbulence of the night before had settled, leaving behind a grounded certainty. While Charles typed additional documents, I turned my phone back on. It immediately vibrated with a flood of missed calls and messages. Lily had called more than 20 times. Adrian nearly as many. Several messages appeared in rapid succession. Dad, please call me. This is serious. John, the bank called us. What is going on? Michael, we need to talk immediately. Please don't do anything rash. Dad, answer me. It was just a joke. Call me back. Now, their urgency did not come from concern for me. That was clear enough. Their panic was tied entirely to the gift they believed was already theirs. I blocked both numbers with steady fingers. Moments later, a new message came from Eric. Dad, I know everything is chaotic. Charles texted me. I'm here if you need me. A pulse of warmth spread through me. one of the few gentle sensations of the morning. I replied simply, "Thank you, son. I'm all right. We'll talk soon." When Charles finished with the paperwork, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "There's something else we need to do," he said. "Install another camera in the living room. If they come here today, and they will, I want their words on record. The more they reveal, the stronger your legal position becomes." I nodded. My friend retrieved a small device from his briefcase, far more advanced than the older system he had recommended years earlier. It was no bigger than a matchbox, with directional audio and cloud storage. "I'll place it behind the frame of that portrait of Margaret," he said. "It's the perfect angle." As he installed it, I watched the photograph, Margaret smiling faintly, the way she always did when she knew something I had yet to understand. I felt her presence more acutely than I had in months, almost as though she were witnessing everything with a knowing, sorrowful tenderness. Once the camera was active, Charles returned to the desk and neatly stacked the folders. "The bank will freeze the funds temporarily," he explained. "They'll question Lily and Adrian. By midweek, you'll have the full amount restored." I nodded, absorbing each word. The world no longer felt fogged by emotion. Every detail sharpened. Legal pathways, interpersonal dynamics, the weight of betrayal, the necessity of boundaries. After Charles left, I moved through the house like a man rediscovering the architecture of his own life. The sunlight fell across the hardwood floors in warm stripes. Dust motes drifted in lazy spirals, details I hadn't paid attention to in years. At 11:30, my phone chimed. A notification from the bank. Investigation initiated. Property transfer frozen, pending review. Appointment scheduled for June 20th. It was done. I made myself a simple lunch, though I hardly tasted it. The house felt strangely quiet, not empty, but expectant, as though holding its breath. I spent the next hour reviewing segments of the recordings again, not to punish myself, but to understand the depth of what had happened. The evidence revealed a pattern, not a momentary lapse. Months of calculated positioning, whispered conversations, and mocking tones they assumed would never reach my ears. At one point, I paused on a frame of Lily glancing nervously toward the door, her expression conflicted, but not conflicted enough to stop Adrian's cruelty. Not enough to defend her father. Not enough to say, "This is wrong." It was a kind of grief to recognize the distance between the daughter I raised and the woman on the screen. Around noon, Eric arrived with a small bag of groceries. "You look steadier," he said as he set apples, bread, and cheese on the counter. "I am steadier," I replied. He studied me with a depth that reminded me so much of Margaret. "Good," he said softly. "You deserve steadiness." We sat together in the kitchen, eating quietly. "Lily called me," he said at one point. "She's panicked. She'll have to face the consequences," I replied. "I know. I just wanted you to know I'm on your side." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've always been on my side." We talked about practicalities, the coming bank meeting, the likely reactions, the next legal steps. Eric offered to stay the afternoon, but I told him to go. I needed space, not out of avoidance, but because solitude had become a tool of clarity. After he left, I walked to the attic and pulled down a wooden trunk I hadn't touched in decades. Inside were the sketches and tools of my younger years. I traced the lines of an unfinished drawing, a table design I once believed I would build one day. The sight of it awakened something in me, a quiet realization that the story of my life did not have to end with humiliation or betrayal. There was still time, perhaps more time than I had ever allowed myself to believe, to become the man I had once dreamed of being. If the wedding night had shattered something inside me, this moment, quietly reconnecting with the past, began to rebuild something new. And soon, the people who had mocked me would discover that the man they believed they could manipulate was no longer the man standing before them. The doorbell rang just past 6:30 in the evening, not politely, but with the frantic insistence of someone pounding rather than pressing. I glanced at the security monitor and saw exactly what I expected. Lily and Adrian standing on the porch, their faces tight and storm-dark. Lily wore a simple blue sundress, her hair pulled back hastily. Her eyes were red, as though she had been crying for hours. Adrian, on the other hand, looked furious, jaw clenched, shirt wrinkled, fists tied at his sides. They rang the bell again, harder. I opened the door after a deliberate pause. "Where have you been?" Adrian barked, pushing his way inside before I had even stepped aside. Lily followed, wringing her hands. "Dad, we've been calling all day," she said. "The bank contacted us. They said you canceled the condo. They said you submitted some kind of evidence." "What does that even mean?" Her voice trembled with panic, not remorse. I gestured toward the living room, intentionally positioning them in full view of the new hidden camera behind Margaret's portrait. "Sit," I said calmly. Adrian refused. He stood with hands on his hips, pacing like a caged animal. "The bank told us the transfer is frozen. They said you're challenging the purchase." "What are you playing at, John?" "It is not a game," I replied. "Well, it feels like one," he snapped. "You promised us that condo. We planned our future around it. You cannot just dash." "I can," I interrupted quietly. "And I did, because I discovered exactly what the two of you think of me." Lily stepped forward, desperate. "Dad, please don't do this." "It was a joke. A horrible joke, I admit, but dash." I raised a hand. "Before you explain, watch this." I pulled the small USB drive from my pocket and inserted it into the television. The screen flickered to life, displaying a timestamp. June 8th, 2024. Adrian's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "I've been pretending to listen to his endless stories for nearly 3 years. But once that condo is in our name, it will all be worth it." Lily's face drained of color. Adrian stiffened, then scoffed. "So you were spying on us? Secret recordings? In your own house?" "That's dash. Perfectly legal," I said. "Installed years ago on the advice of a friend. And apparently necessary." I played another clip. This one from late May. Lily's voice. "Do you think he suspects anything?" "Adrian, your father? Of course not. He's too sentimental to question anything." Lily covered her mouth, eyes wide and wet. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't mean dash." "You meant enough," I replied, my tone even, not unkind but immovable. "You allowed him to speak about me like that. Over and over. You let him mock the promise I made to your mother. And then last night, you laughed with him while he humiliated me in front of 300 people." Adrian snapped. "It was just a joke. A stupid joke. Anyone with a sense of humor would know that." "A joke," I repeated. "Mocking a man who gave you everything you never earned." Adrian took 2 angry steps toward me, but stopped when I pointed subtly toward Margaret's portrait. "You should know," I said quietly. "You're being recorded right now. Every word, every threat, every insult." His eyes flashed with recognition, then with fury. "You're insane," he growled. "This is manipulation. You claim to be the victim, but you've been plotting this all along. Recording us to control us. Who does that? What kind of father, dash?" "One who refuses to be mistreated," I answered. Lily stepped closer, tears spilling freely now. "Dad, please," she whispered. "I know we made mistakes. I know I didn't defend you. I know I hurt you. But canceling the condo? Blocking the funds? That's extreme. It's unfair." "Unfair," I echoed, letting the words settle between us. "Unfair is allowing your husband to ridicule me publicly. Unfair is hearing my daughter laugh while I am humiliated. Unfair is discovering that for nearly 3 years, you two saw me as a vault to be opened, not a father to be loved." She sobbed, reaching for me. I stepped back. The gesture froze her in place. "Dad," she breathed. Adrian, seeing her falter, exploded again. "We invested years into this relationship. Years. And now you're going to destroy everything because your pride got hurt." "No," I said calmly. "I'm ending it because my dignity matters more than your entitlement." He jabbed a finger toward me. "We'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this. You can't take everything away." "You already did," I replied. "You took my trust, my respect, the relationship I thought I had with my daughter." Silence. Heavy. Final. Lily wiped her face, trembling. "Dad, I don't want to lose you. You lost the version of me who allowed this," I said softly. "That man is gone." For a moment, no one moved. Then Adrian grabbed Lily's arm. "We're leaving. This old man can rot in his paranoia." He yanked her toward the door. Lily looked back at me one last time, grief in her eyes, but also the unmistakable realization that consequences had finally found her. I didn't speak. I simply watched them go. The door closed behind them with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any slam could. In the silence that followed, I felt no triumph, no gloating, no vindication. Only truth, and the quiet beginning of the life I had long delayed. When the door shut behind Lily and Adrian, the house fell into a stillness so profound it felt almost sacred. I stood there for several minutes, not moving, not thinking, simply listening to the weight of silence settle across the rooms. It was the same silence I had lived with after Margaret passed, but felt different now. Then, it had been filled with sorrow. Now, it carried a strange clarity. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, a ritual Margaret always used to calm my restless mind. As the steam curled upward from the cup, I felt a memory rise with it. Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, tapping her pen against a notepad, saying, "John, you don't have to live your entire life for others. There's room for you somewhere in that plan of yours." Back then, I didn't understand what she meant. Today, it finally reached me. The events of the past 24 hours had stripped away the illusions I had clung to out of habit, out of longing, out of obligation. I thought giving Lily everything she asked for was an act of love, but I had only been teaching her to value the gift more than the giver. I took the tea upstairs to the attic, turning on the dim light that flickered slightly as though protesting its own age. I opened the wooden trunk, the one I had touched earlier that day, and sat on the floor cross-legged, something I hadn't done in decades. The first sketchbook lay on top. I opened it to the first page, a pencil drawing of a table, the proportions slightly off, the lines shaky, clearly the work of a young man full of passion but lacking experience. I smiled despite myself. I remember the night I drew it, staying up until 2 in the morning, imagining what my life would look like if I pursued carpentry full-time. Then I remember the moment I gave up on that dream. The conversation with my father, telling me that creativity was for people who could afford to starve. I chose the safe path, the responsible path. And for many years, I convinced myself it was enough. But life has a way of circling back on the things we abandon. My fingers trailed over the grainy paper, the faint graphite smudges. In that quiet space, a thought emerged, gentle but persistent. What if it isn't too late? I sifted deeper into the trunk. Old carving tools, dull and rusted, lay nestled beneath yellowed notes. Then, near the bottom, I found a photograph I hadn't seen in decades, the one taken in Boulder. There I was 27, standing beside Elena, both of us beaming at a small exhibition of handmade pieces. She held a ceramic sculpture. I held a little oak stool I had carved over the course of a month. Her smile in that photograph felt like a spark I had forgotten existed. I went downstairs, tea in hand, and opened my laptop. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure, but a quiet certainty nudged me forward. I typed, "Elena Ruiz Art Studio Boulder." Within seconds, her name appeared, a professional website, photographs of her workshop, a biography. Students gathered around her as she demonstrated techniques. Her hair gray now, cut short, her smile unchanged. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I clicked her contact page, reread the form twice, then began typing. "Elena, it has been nearly 4 decades since we last spoke. I don't expect you to remember me, but you encouraged me once, encouraged me to follow a path I was too afraid to choose. Life carried me in other directions, and I became a man my younger self might not recognize. Recent events have made me reconsider what I abandoned. I saw your school, and something in me stirred, something I thought was gone. If you are open to it, I would like to reconnect. Warm regards, Jonathan Hale." I hesitated before pressing send. Part of me feared it would seem foolish, a man in his late 60s reaching across time to someone from a life he never lived. But the larger part of me understood. This wasn't nostalgia. It was permission. Permission to imagine again. I clicked send. The message left my screen like a breath released after years of holding it in. With the sun dipping low, I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. Not out of sadness, but acceptance. The life that had played out within these walls, the dinners, the holidays, the late-night talks with Margaret, had been real and meaningful. But something new was emerging now, pressing gently against the edges of my routine, asking to be acknowledged. Before going to bed, I sat at my desk and opened a blank page in my notebook. The paper looked wide, white, full of possibility. I wrote at the top, "Who am I now?" The answer didn't come immediately. It didn't need to. What mattered was the realization that the man who woke up that morning, humiliated, heartbroken, exhausted, was not the same man sitting here now. I had thought loss would break me. Instead, it revealed a door I hadn't known existed. A door leading to a life that had waited patiently in the background for nearly 40 years. As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed. Not a call, a notification. A new email. I opened it. "Jonathan, of course I remember you. And yes, it is never too late. Elena." Her message was short, but it was enough to change the course of the story. In the days that followed, life unfolded with an uncanny mixture of tension and calm. Outside, storms were gathering, legal threats, panic calls, pressure from people who had once felt familiar. Inside, however, an unexpected peace had begun to settle, like the slow tide returning after a violent wave. 3 mornings after the confrontation, I received a formal letter from an attorney in Charleston. The envelope bore the embossed stamp of a mid-tier law office. Inside, a neatly typed document demanded the reversal of the condo cancellation and full reinstatement of the promised marital gift. The language was professional, but the subtext was unmistakably Adrian's. Entitlement disguised as grievance. The letter accused me of acting on impulse, of withholding a binding gift, and most ironically of damaging the emotional well-being of the newlyweds through erratic conduct. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I laughed. Not bitterly, but softly, the kind of laugh one makes when a magician reveals a trick you already saw through. I forwarded the document to Charles, adding only, "Please handle this." He replied within minutes, already drafting the response. "Don't worry." By the next afternoon, his rebuttal, 20 pages of meticulously outlined evidence, was sent to their attorney. He had transcribed portions of the recordings, highlighted the repeated manipulation, detailed the contractual rights behind the cancellation, and emphasized that no court in the state would interpret exploitation as grounds for enforcing a gift. The final line of Charles's letter read, "My client will not be coerced by individuals who have demonstrated persistent bad faith." Those words felt like armor. 2 days later, the bank completed its investigation. A message arrived confirming what Charles had predicted confidently since day one. "Full recovery approved. Funds released back to your account." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because of the money, though losing nearly $500,000 would have been devastating, but because it symbolized something deeper, the return of control, of choice, of dignity. The following morning, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee while the sun climbed over the marshes behind my home. A light breeze rolled across the water, carrying the distant calls of birds beginning their day. I inhaled slowly, letting the warmth soak into me. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about business meetings or property maintenance schedules or upcoming holiday reservations at the inns. I wasn't juggling the invisible weight of being this steady one, the father who never faltered, the man who fixed everything. I simply existed, and that alone felt like a revelation. Shortly after lunch, Eric stopped by again, carrying fresh bread and tomatoes as if he sensed I had not been feeding myself properly. He had inherited Margaret's intuition, that quiet ability to understand what another person needed without being told. We sat together in the kitchen. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. I considered my answer carefully. "Lighter," I said. "Strangely lighter." He nodded, slicing into the bread. "Good. You deserve that." He paused, then added, "Lily called me again. She wanted me to talk sense into you." "And did you?" He shook his head. "No. I told her she needs to talk sense into herself." We shared a quiet meal, not celebratory, not somber, simply human. When we finished eating, Eric leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, I think what happened, as awful as it was, might be giving you permission to live differently. The remark surprised me, not because it was untrue, but because it was exactly the thought I had been avoiding naming aloud. Differently how? I asked. Eric studied my face. Dad, you've spent your entire adult life working, providing, sacrificing, even when you didn't love what you were doing. Maybe it's time to build a life that isn't shaped by obligation. His words hung between us like a door slightly ajar. And suddenly, the idea that had hovered at the edge of my mind, the idea that had emerged when I opened that attic trunk, stepped more clearly into focus. What if I sold the ends? I murmured. Eric froze mid-reach for his coffee cup. Are you serious? I think I might be. Dad, that's huge. I know. What would you do afterward? I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it felt like stepping into a version of myself I had abandoned decades earlier. I might go back to woodworking, I said. Really go back. Not as a hobby, as a life. A warmth spread across Eric's expression. Then I think you should do it. The simplicity of his support nearly undid me. For years, I had been giving, and now, finally, someone was giving me permission to be something other than a provider. After he left, I returned to the trunk in the attic and pulled out my old carpentry tools. The metal felt cold but familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend after decades apart. Then, as afternoon sunlight slanted through the small attic window, my laptop chimed. An email from Elena. Jonathan, your message meant more than you may realize. If you're considering a change, come see Boulder. My workshop always has room for someone willing to learn or relearn. You once had a rare gift. I hope you'll let yourself use it again. Warmly, Elena. I read the email twice, then 3 times. Her words didn't feel like an invitation. They felt like a doorway, and I felt myself walking toward it. The idea of selling the ends, my life's work for more than 4 decades, settled over me like a soft blanket at first, warm but unfamiliar. The longer it stayed, the clearer it became that the decision had already been forming inside me long before the wedding disaster. I had merely ignored it, as people often ignore the truth that threatens to rearrange the structure of their lives. But now, with the facade of family expectations stripped away, the truth no longer frightened me. It felt like oxygen. 2 days after speaking with Eric, I called a real estate appraiser named Harrison Tate, a man known for his blunt honesty and meticulous valuations. He arrived at my home a week later, a clipboard under his arm and reading glasses perched at the end of his nose. I've admired your ends for years, Mr. Hale, he said as we shook hands. They're small but curated, distinct, rare to find that kind of consistency over decades. He spent nearly 4 hours touring all 4 properties, examining their structural integrity, occupancy records, revenue sheets, renovation history. I walked behind him in quiet contemplation, touching the walls I had painted countless times, remembering the guests who had stayed there over the years, the little stories that had woven themselves into the rhythm of the buildings. Finally, after running the numbers, Harrison looked up with a nod of approval. Combined value sits just over $2,400,000, he said. You built something lasting. The number didn't shock me, but hearing it spoken aloud, quantified and real, made the Chapter 1 was closing feel definitive. A few days later, I reached out to a New York investor named Samuel Crane, a man who had shown interest in expanding his hospitality portfolio to Charleston years earlier. I told him the inns were officially for sale. He responded within hours. I'll fly in next week. Samuel arrived with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to buying more properties in a year than most people would in a lifetime. Still, he treated me with respect, a quality that surprised me more than it should have. These inns, he said, walking through the lobby of the oldest location, aren't just businesses. They have character. You designed them with intention. I nodded. I built them to feel like homes. That's exactly why I want them, he replied. Negotiations lasted 3 weeks. Not contentious, but thorough. Samuel was fair, but firm. I was calm, but certain. We sat side by side in conference rooms, reviewed documents, exchanged counterproposals. And all the while, I felt Margaret's presence gently guiding me. as though whispering, "You're finally making space for yourself." When we signed the preliminary contract in late August, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Deep, uncluttered relief. As I placed my signature on the final page, Samuel extended his hand. "You've built a meaningful legacy," he said. "I'll take good care of it." I believed him. That mattered more than the money. That night, I returned to my now quiet home, walked into the living room, and switched on only one lamp. I sat down with a glass of water and allowed the silence to wash over me. Not a silence of emptiness, a silence of clearing. An open field after a long storm. My laptop pinged with a new email. It was from Elena. "John, if you truly meant what you wrote about rekindling what you once loved, then Boulder is ready whenever you are. Come see the workshop. Walk the old streets again. Let your hands remember what they have not forgotten. Life begins many times." Warmly, Elena. I read it again and again. There are messages that ask for answers and messages that give answers. Hers was the latter. The following day, I began sorting through my belongings. I donated dozens of suits I no longer needed. I boxed up old financial ledgers. I took framed certificates off the walls, symbols of accomplishments that no longer define me. Then I returned to the attic and removed every sketchbook, tool, and photo connected to the version of myself I had once been. They felt less like relics now and more like blueprints for a future finally within reach. As I packed each item, the decision solidified. I would move to Colorado, not for a fresh start. Fresh starts are for people who believe their old selves need erasing. This was something different. This was a continuation of a story interrupted. I booked a moving truck for the first week of October. Eric came by with boxes, tape, and a half-serious grin. "You're really doing this," he said. "I am. I'm proud of you." I paused, struck by how deeply those words landed. "You know," I said slowly, "for years I thought responsibility meant staying put. And now you know," he replied gently, "that responsibility also means choosing the life that keeps you alive." We packed until the sun dipped below the horizon. Later that evening, I stood on the back porch drinking tea, watching the fireflies flicker across the yard. This home, the one where Margaret and I raised our children, where laughter once echoed, where grief once settled like dust, had served its purpose with loyalty. But the life waiting for me beyond Charleston called with a quiet certainty. A life shaped not by duty, but by desire. A life where I would not be the man mocked in a ballroom, but the man building furniture with his own hands, breathing mountain air, and finding companionship not out of obligation, but of choice. A life I had denied myself for nearly 40 years. And now, finally, I was ready to walk into it. The morning I left Charleston, the sky blushed with soft shades of rose and gold, a gentle farewell from a city that had shaped me, held me, and finally released me. Eric helped load the last boxes into the moving truck, then hugged me tightly before I stepped into my car. "Go live your real life now, Dad," he whispered. I drove west for 3 days, crossing miles of open land until the mountains of Colorado rose like ancient guardians on the horizon. Boulder greeted me with crisp autumn air, the scent of pine, and a quiet hum of creativity that stirred something deep within me. Elena met me outside her studio, her hair silver, her smile warm, her eyes carrying the same spark I remembered from decades earlier. "Welcome home, John," she said. Home. The word felt right in a way it never had before. Together we walked through her workshop, sunlight spilling across shelves of clay, wood, and half-shaped ideas. In a corner, she had cleared a space for me, a sturdy workbench, a set of finely sharpened tools, and a sign that read simply, "Hail Workshop, handcrafted with life." I began working that very week. My hands trembled at first, then steadied, then remembered. The rhythm of carving, sanding, shaping, it all returned like an old language I had once spoken fluently. The days filled with purpose rather than obligation. Evenings were spent with Elena, sharing wine, stories, and the quiet contentment of two people who had outgrown pretense. Lily kept her distance, though Eric brought my granddaughter to visit twice. I held the little girl gently, without bitterness, knowing her arrival marked not a reconciliation, but a new beginning built on clarity, not illusion. In the end, revenge would have kept me bound to the past. But choosing myself, choosing authenticity, became the greatest triumph of my life. At 67 years old, I did not start over. I simply started living.